All right, it is time now for our weekly segment of Ask Mike, and our senior analyst is here with us. And Mike, you know how we start every week. Let's get a COVID-19 update from you.
Okay, there's not been a lot of movement in the last week, and some of the stuff we already talked about last week. It's the big thing was the students coming back to classes. And I think we talked last week about a problem at North Carolina, and they had already moved to online classes. There was an issue of whether or not football players, you know, could still be on campus if they kicked the students off. And it looks like after a week of this kind of being kicked around, what we may end up with, if we start having these COVID outbreaks among students throughout these conferences that are still playing football, which would be the ACC, the SEC, Big 12, if we have that, it may well be that these athletes have done such a good job over the summer of staying COVID-free that there's going to be less resistance to allow them to continue to use campus facilities when everyone else is off campus.
I got you.
So there's at least some indication that if that continues to be a problem at other schools, that's what will happen. Rather than just saying we can't play football, which would cause huge problems for these schools in these conferences, and believe me, it's going to cause problems in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 too. But instead of just shutting it down, they may end up looking at it and saying this maybe is the best answer. The students stay safer if they're online because we still don't have COVID under control enough. But the players have proven they can do it if they don't mix in with the regular students. They're more disciplined. And that may be the answer to playing football. So I feel pretty good about that. Now, the other thing that happens this week here at Arkansas is you get a scrimmage on Friday. In fact, you go full pads, I think, starting tomorrow. And then a scrimmage on Friday. And this all along, the people that don't think you can play football have been saying all along, well, that's when this is going to stop. Because they believe when football players, bam, start running into each other face to face and breathing on each other, then they're going to spread COVID. And they're not, in saying that, they're not taking several things into consideration. First of all, they're now testing 3 times a week. So the odds of you sticking someone on the practice field, and certainly they're going to test before games, the odds of people being in a game or even on the practice field and being positive are pretty narrow. Because they're testing enough to get you out of there before that happens. But if it did happen to a rare player that fell through the cracks, they've got these new masks that we talked about last week, those plastic shower curtain type material that goes over the face masks. And the belief is that the players can play in that, they can breathe in it. Now, it looks like to me these things get torn up in a game. So I don't know what you do if your mask gets all ripped up. I don't know, you go to the sidelines.
They got an extra one or something.
They have trainers that can put it back on real easily. But that is the hope that if somebody very rarely got into practice or got into a game and had it, and they're across the offensive or defensive line from you and they're breathing into your face, the mask would then prevent that. And once again, I keep pointing this out, but I'll say it once again. Football is an outdoor sport, and it's not impossible to transmit COVID outdoors, but it's a lot more difficult. It's not as likely. So when you throw the masks in and all that stuff and the testing, I feel pretty good about the situation.
I think the main thing is just stay off Dixon Street for a while.
That's right. If you want to continue to go to class, but that's going to be up to the students. They have to do it. And the last thing we heard, which was several days ago, there had only been 3-4 students test positive. Now you've got everybody starting today. What does that do? And we'll talk about that next week.
It's going to be kind of an evolving situation. Our first question this week, though, comes from Pork Soda, who asks, are we going to get some practice reports this year, Mike?
Yeah, we've already had a bunch of them every day, really. I mean, let me look at who we've talked to so far.
We've talked to
Sam Pittman, Rakeem Boyd, Bumper Pool, Buster Brown, Mike Woods, and we'll have 2 more guys today. I don't know if Pittman's,
we don't know who yet.
I don't know if Pittman's going to talk. I assume he will. This would be about today's practice. So we're getting, we're able to write practice reports. And one day last week, selected members of each media outlet, that's 1 person per outlet, was able to go watch practice. Some, like the TV stations, who have to have a shooter because we shoot video, that's our shooter. But we've all had somebody that was at those practices, and we've also been able to look at the video. So we're able to tell a little bit about what's happening. So you combine what the coaches say and the players say with what little we've seen. You can do a practice report. Now, look, we don't have the access we even had last year. And people were complaining about that.
It's very different.
That's because of COVID. Now, but still, I'm not sure what this means for the future, because here's what I was told. that Sam Pittman will follow the Georgia model. That's what was going on at Georgia. And apparently they don't have coordinators. So you people that like to hear from Kendall Briles and like to hear from whoever at the various schools, and this would include Arkansas for Sam Pittman, Barry Odom. We may not hear a lot from him.
Yeah.
The idea apparently is that those coordinators are busy, and he doesn't want to take time out every week like we did last year, where every Monday they had to come in there and do that. Now, I hope long term Sam Pittman will change his mind about that. I'm certainly going to talk to him about it at the appropriate time, which is not right now. And hopefully, he's a good guy. Hopefully, we'll get more access in the future. But right now, it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot. But considering COVID, we've had more than I thought we would have.
Yeah, I think they've done a great job in trying to help us out. But yeah, we're kind of taking them at their word right now because we haven't really seen much of anything from those practices.
That's what you really do anyway. You're not going to watch the first 20 minutes of a practice. I get a kick out of reading these practice reports by some of these guys because they're coming to a lot of conclusions based on
a 15-minute period.
I've never seen a player yet that got into a Zoom or a press conference and said, yeah, we're not looking very good.
No,
I'm doing a bad job.
It was a bad day.
Coaches will generally be a little more honest, but practice reports, you always got to take them with a grain of salt.
Okay, our next question comes from Blood Red Hog, who says, winning 4 games in 2020 would be a home run for Coach Pittman. If you could choose which 4 games the Hogs most likely win, what would they be?
Yeah, I think this has come up before. I would pick Mississippi State, Ole Miss, probably A&M and Missouri. You might throw Auburn in there and replace Auburn with A&M. I'm not sure. Part of the problem with this is you're basing a lot of things on what you think teams will do, and that might change once the season starts. Somebody, A&M might be worse, they might be better, Auburn might be better or worse, but those are basically the 4 teams I've been talking about.
I think it'd be huge if they beat A&M.
Yes, you would snap
and
that.
Auburn, of course.
You would snap that losing streak. It'd be fun because you would have won in College Station in front of probably 25,000 fans.
Yeah.
That's a bigger stadium, so that's going to probably be one of the biggest crowds Arkansas sees this year.
Yeah.
But even with that, it couldn't possibly be more than about 30,000. So
yeah, I mean, realistically though, 4 wins, like you said, would be
that would be great.
An ideal situation if we could get to that. Pork Belly says, has anyone asked about the snap technique, Mike?
Yeah.
We were talking about this
This
earlier.
is one of the things I like about this segment because there are fans that always come up with questions that we should have asked.
Right.
And we didn't ask. That's one we haven't asked. Now, Ty Clary was the center last year, and there were fans that claimed from watching our games that Ty was, I don't know how else to put this, it sounds nutty, he's a slow snapper.
He was.
Like the ball gets back there very slow. And they felt like that caused problems for the quarterback because it took so long for the quarterback to get the ball. They didn't have time to read the defenses, and it caused all kinds of problems in the backfield. Now, I'll have to say, Chad Morris always blew that off. He acted like it was goofy.
Yeah.
And I can't tell this story now, but there was a thing in high school where I was playing against a guy that was supposedly a slow snapper. I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard of. One of my teammates kept claiming, he's a slow snapper. You could grab the ball from him. And I was like, how stupid is that? So I don't think Ty is that slow, but we will ask Sam Pittman the next time we're around him if Ty Clary is still a slow snapper.
Hopefully he's getting better and working on that. Our next question is from Hog Fan XJ, who asks, is Coach Muss going to try and fill Isiah Joe's scholarship spot, or do you think he plans to leave it vacant?
You know, my best guess is this late, we're really at the start of the school year.
Yeah.
You're not going to see somebody come in on scholarship, a transfer on scholarship. Now, they did add maybe last week or the week before a walk-on grad transfer. His name is Brandon Kimball. He's a 6'7" forward from Mississippi Valley State. And I suppose if they're happy with him, he could end up with that scholarship. But I don't think they're going to bring in another regular grad transfer for this. I don't know. Maybe you get one in January.
It just seems a bit late to add anyone else. But our next question comes from Hob Hogg, who says, even if SEC and other conferences play football this fall, there is talk of granting an extra year of eligibility due to the COVID season being so uncertain and strange, and to keep teams from just playing players 4 games so they don't burn a year. Shouldn't this be determined before the first game is played? Well,
yeah, this is interesting. You know, I'd been thinking about this long before this decision was made, and by the way, it is going to happen.
Right.
They've already
It's
done that.
official.
The NCAA has announced that I don't care who you are, if you could start every single game and play every minute of every game, you still get a year back, which seems kind of crazy, but that's what they've decided. So I was thinking, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, a month ago, can't remember. Okay, you know, Sam Pittman's really got a problem in terms of these freshmen. Because you want to try and play these guys as much as possible. 4 games a year is maximum you can play with and keep your red shirt. But how do you do that when you've got problems and you're trying to win and you're trying to build your program back and you're playing no non-conference games and the toughest schedule in the country? Where are your opportunities going to be to play these guys? Well, the only way would be if you get beat so badly, you just go ahead and put some of these other guys in. And I suppose that could happen. But I have to believe that, you know, Pittman wants to be as competitive as possible. So I was thinking it's going to be tough to get all of these freshmen in and play them some to take advantage of their redshirt year. Well, now he doesn't have to make that decision because they will all be true freshmen again next year if that's what they want to be. Now, all of that sounds really good, but there's a rub. And the rub is you got to pay for it.
Exactly.
So if you decided to let all of these freshmen be freshmen again, then you've got a new class of freshmen. So all of a sudden your freshman class is like, I don't know, 40 guys or something.
Yeah.
How do you fund all of that when you've lost all this revenue from ticket sales this year? And that's going to impact for a while. And we're not just talking about football players here. If you allowed football players to do it and then told the other people they couldn't do it, the other sports,
can't do that.
You'd have a problem.
It's all fall sports right now.
So here's what I think is going to happen. Coaches are going to make this decision, but they're going to really basically tell these guys, if you want to come back, that's fine for an extra year, but you're probably going to have to figure out a way to pay for it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if a guy really wants to come back and thinks he can help himself with another year, that's fine. But I just, maybe you push this, kick the can down the road. If you have this super large freshman class,
try and space it out a
maybe
little
2 or
bit.
3 years from now, you could still get some extra eligibility, some of this year's true freshmen, because the money situation is better. But the answer to this question is it's complicated.
It is.
We're not sure exactly how it's going to work out.
And I think it's mainly for some of those guys who, you kind of touched on it, are trying to go pro and just need that extra year. And if they can't play right now, I mean, it seems unfair to just be like, oh, well.
I think they did it, obviously, for the 2 big conferences that aren't playing and some of the smaller ones. But they felt like they had to be fair to everybody, so they made a blanket situation. But it's going to cause some issues with schools that are still playing or are planning to play.
Our next question comes from WooPig88, who wants to know, if our basketball program excels under Eric Musselman like it looks like it could, how long do you think he will stay at Arkansas before leaving for a better D1 job or the NBA again? Or do you think he will stay here as long as we will have him?
I think we got that question either last week or the week before. We're going to get it again because people are worried about it now. And all I can say is it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Because you'd much rather be worried about a guy leaving than having somebody so terrible you want him to leave. My best guess is that Eric Musselman likes it here. He certainly appears to like it. His wife is all over the place doing. You know, we saw her
at the Make-A-Wish event.
She's a terrific lady. She's got family ties in Arkansas. They love it here. I'm not saying he wouldn't leave. It would be awfully tempting if you got offered a job like North Carolina or Duke. And so he might. But here's the thing. If he gets a job offer like that and if he takes it, what does that mean? It means Arkansas is a top 5 program. And so what it also means is Hunter Yurachek would have a much easier job trying to fill that job than he did when he got lucky, honestly, with Musselman because he was just out there and wanted the job. But normally it would be much harder. Now, I would say this about staying here, and I apply that to ADs, coaches, a lot of people. There are a lot of people that came into the U of A thinking, okay, you know, I'm just moving up. I was told last week that was Hunter Yurachek's attitude when he first got here. Okay, this is a step up. I'd really like to be the AD at A&M or Texas or whatever, and this could help me do that. But now that he's been here a year and a half or whatever, he's like thinking, no, I like it here. This could be a place I'll stay. And that happens to a lot of people. It happened to Coach Broyles. It happened to Norm DeBryan from Wisconsin. I mean, it happened to John McDonald from Ireland. Lance Harder, where was he from? California or somewhere? Somewhere like that. I mean, he's come in here and stayed. A lot of these coaches come in and basically say, yeah, I like it here. So Musselman might be one of those guys. Nolan Richardson did it, even with all the problems he had. He still lives out there on his Richardson Ranch out there in northwest of Fayetteville. And I couldn't find it if I tried, and I've been there 5 times. Every time I go out there, I have to call him, Nolan, I'm lost. And he tells me where to turn, you know. It's pretty funny.
You know what, it happened to you too. You came here and you love it, and here you are.
Oh, I came in 75, thought, well, I'll stay here for a year or so, move up. And then I just kind of went, nope, I like it.
Nope, I'm going to stay.
That's 44 years ago.
All right, our next question comes from Peacock, who wants to know, with the transfer portal becoming a normal staple in college sports, name a former Razorback in any sport that transferred out and went on to have an outstanding career. My choice would be Byron Irvin in basketball.
Yeah, that's a good choice. You know, Byron Irvin left for Missouri when Eddie Sutton left for Kentucky.
Okay.
And that's understandable.
Yeah.
And he was up there 2 years, did a good job, went into the NBA, so that's a good pick. But rather than talk about somebody that had an outstanding career, how about talking about a transfer that had a huge impact on Arkansas when he left?
Okay.
And I would say that would be Ty Storey. Because Ty Storey, everyone thought when he was here, okay, he's terrible, let him go.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Chad Morris was bringing in Ben Hicks, and he was bringing in Nick Starkel. And everybody thought, oh, those guys are a lot better.
Yeah.
Go away, Ty Storey. Then those, you know, all of a sudden Starkel and Hicks get here, and they're not any good. And now you're thinking, what the heck's going on? And then Ty Storey comes back in here in Western Kentucky, and he looks like 1,000% better, beats the snot out of Arkansas right there in front of their own fans. And I think when Hunter Yurachek saw that, he went, wait a minute. These coaches cannot develop quarterbacks. This guy was averaged or below average. Now he's looking really good. We need to get somebody else. So if you're glad that Chad Morris is not here anymore, you need to, if you run into Ty Storey, give him a pat on the back, buy him dinner, or, you know, do something, because he did Razorback fans a huge favor.
Yeah, I hated that for him too, though, that he had to leave in order to be a successful
I think he got the last laugh.
I agree with that.
And he played better.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in a better situation than if he'd stayed.
All right, Blood Red Hog asks, assuming CBS wants one of the SEC favorites for the season opening on Saturday, what are the chances Georgia-Arkansas makes the national 2:30 broadcast?
Yeah, where do I have this somewhere? I've got a list of all those other games.
There you go. It's right there.
Yeah, so let's see. The other choices are Alabama, Missouri, LSU, Mississippi State, Florida, Ole Miss, A&M, Vanderbilt. Now, what do all those games have in common? They're all mismatches.
Yeah.
That doesn't look like something CBS would look at and go, wow. I mean, we're just going to get a blowout game. But it is the opening weekend, and they're desperate for college football, so he's probably right. You're going to want to put a name SEC team out there.
Agreed.
And the only real hook on any of these games is the Georgia-Arkansas game because of Sam Pittman's ties to Georgia.
Right.
So I think there's a very good possibility that Arkansas on the opening weekend could have that prime Saturday afternoon game, which would be nice.
That would be nice, not an 11 a.m. game like we had a bunch of the last
two
seasons. Delta Boy wants to know, do you feel stronger about QB Felipe Franks being the starter after this first week of practice?
You know, I do, because I felt all along the only way he's not going to be the starter is if there was some problem with that ankle. It was a pretty bad ankle injury, and he still wasn't full speed last spring. And that was probably one of the benefits of not having to go through spring football is he didn't get that ankle tested. Well, apparently he's now fully recovered. And all the word we get is the players really like him, the receivers like him. If you have any doubts about Felipe Franks and you're not all that familiar with him, go to YouTube and just get any of his games when he was at Florida. I started watching him back in 2018. He had a great year. Here's what he does. He's big, and he's really quick for how big he is. He's not Matt Jones fast, but he's more physical than Matt Jones. He can break tackles. He's got good maneuverability. He can start and stop well. And he's had several long runs where he just takes off and they can't tackle him. But he throws the ball better than Matt Jones. He's a really good passer, and he makes good decisions. And Florida didn't protect him all that well at times either, and he still showed the ability to deal with pressure. So I think he's the best quarterback Arkansas has had in a while. We'll have to see if it translates to Arkansas. But I feel like he's going to be the starter unless something happens to him where he gets hurt or whatever.
It's like we talked about. It's his job to lose right now.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
All right, Jump D asks, aside from the politics and the Malzahn situation, what was the biggest issue that really held Houston Nutt back from being great? He had several good seasons, but never got Arkansas to be considered a top program in the country.
You know, it depends on who you talk to. Some fans always felt like he was just too one-dimensional. He was all running game, and he didn't really like to throw the ball that much, which I always thought was really odd because Nutt himself as a player was a passing quarterback and didn't run with the ball.
Okay.
So I never really understood that, but there's no question he was more interested apparently in the running game based on his play calling, and he had better running backs than he had quarterbacks. So that made some sense. But there were other issues there. Some people felt like the biggest problem, and I think he had a problem with Frank off and on. Frank Broyles was kind of strange in terms of being your boss as a head coach. He'd be mad at you for a while, then he wouldn't be, then he would be mad at you again. But the issue of Houston wanting to be the play caller, because I think that's where you got most of the complaints. A lot of these fans said, look, he's just a terrible play caller. He's predictable. I can remember being on the photo deck. I think Arkansas was playing Auburn, and it was a Fayetteville game, and I'm up on the photo deck, and the crowd was quiet because there wasn't a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I could hear this fan down below me, and they called timeout on a third down situation, and they're out there huddling and doing all this stuff, and I hear this lady go, "What are they doing that for? He's just going to call a draw again. He's just going to call a draw play," or whatever she said. And then timeout was over, and they ran the exact same play that she said they would run, and I was laughing. But that was the complaint, that he was predictable as a play caller. Now, here's what I would say about Nutt. I always thought the biggest mistake he made was not going to Nebraska. I know that was a tough decision. He's from Arkansas. He loved being the head coach here. But, Frank always said you can be somewhere too long. And people start getting, he had good success while he was here. He did. He took him to the championship game twice. He should have won the championship game in 06. But fans they reached a point where they're kind of wanting somebody else. And that Nebraska job opened up, and it would have been perfect for him because they love running the football at Nebraska, and they love a fired-up coach. I think their problem with Solich, who was their coach at the time, was just kind of boring, Houston Nutt's not boring.
No.
And I think he would have been a good fit up there. I think his offensive philosophy would have worked, and he got talked into staying here. And then he ends up at Ole Miss, where he's not nearly the fit I think that he would have been at Nebraska.
All right, our next question comes from Alabama Hog, who says, I saw a comment from an unnamed SEC coach who stated, Kendall Briles is a strange hire. They don't have the bodies to run that system, and he's had chemistry issues on other staffs. That hire told a lot of us that Sam wasn't alone in making the decisions. Any insight regarding this, Mike?
Well, first of all, I think it's baloney.
Agreed, yeah.
I don't like a lot of these stories where you quote unnamed coaches.
Yeah.
Because
it's like all your unnamed sources.
You don't know who you're talking about. You don't know whether they had an axe to grind or something. But here's the thing. Hunter Yurachek is not the kind of AD to hire a guy and say, well, I'm hiring him, but he's never been a head coach before, so, gee, I'll go get Kendall Briles and let him run everything. That just sounds crazy. Now, I have no doubt that Kendall Briles will be left largely to run his own offense. But I do think, and we've heard from Barry Odom, who's very close to Sam Pittman, he says, hey, when he decides something, that's the way it's going to be.
That's it.
So I don't have any doubts that he's still running the show. Now, as far as Kendall Briles not being a good fit around here because there's not enough talent for what he wants to do, that does sound something like a coach would say, and it's ridiculous because we all know, those of us that covered this team, you look at who they have at wide receiver.
Yeah.
You look at the running back they have, and they may have more than one because there are guys behind Rakeem Boyd that are pretty good. The offensive line has gotten better. It's gotten more mature. The defense has gotten better. This team looks pretty good on paper right now. So to sit back there with this kind of snobby attitude and say, Kendall Briles is not a fit because he's used to being places where they have better talent, I think it's all bunk. I don't doubt that a coach probably said that. But again, he's just a coach popping off because he knows he's not going to be held accountable to for what he says.
All right, Lil Joe wants to know, have you heard any talk among the coaches yet about Tralin Smith? Just from the very brief videos that I've seen on Hogville, Boyd looks absolutely full grown now, and I think we all know he'll be the featured back. But what do you think will be the primary back after that?
Well, I agree on Boyd, because if you look at him right now, he's really cut. He's lost some weight. He's faster. And I think Kendall Briles and his ability to kind of develop an offense that really features good running backs, I think if he stays healthy, Rakeem Boyd could be the real beneficiary, the biggest beneficiary of Kendall Briles. So I think he's the #1 guy. I think he's going to have a great year, barring injury. And knock on wood.
Yeah, where is it?
And yeah, Smith is. We're hearing a lot of good stuff about him. He sat out last year. He's a transfer, and with a lot of potential. Different kind of smaller back, quick moving, side to side, lateral. But there's some other guys out there too. I think the running game will be fine this year.
Roadhog 82 asks, if the ACC or Big 12 were to cancel their season, would the SEC be likely to do the same? Personally, I don't think our conference should be influenced by what other conferences decide, even if that means we are the only conference playing this year. What do you think?
I think if things went the other direction, the SEC would be the last school to make that decision.
Yeah,
I think they're going to be the last. If we don't have football, they'll be the last one to say, okay, we're giving up. But it would be tougher. If you don't have the Big 12 and the ACC, now you're getting a lot of pressure. There are a lot of people saying, "What are you doing over there?" They realize it's not going to be safe for players. You should make the same decision. So I agree that it shouldn't influence Arkansas, but it helps to have friends in high places, other people doing what you're doing. So let's hope that those other conferences, those other two, keep playing, because I think if they stopped, it would be harder for the SEC to keep going.
I think it was Greg Sankey was on the SEC Network a couple weeks ago, and he was asked pretty much the same thing, like, would you play a season if you were the only conference left? And he was like, it seems very unlikely that they would do that. All right. SMTG94, I'm probably saying that wrong, but that is our next question, wants to know, with only 20,000 or so fans in the stands, will they be able to pipe in calling the Hogs?
That's a really good question. And I haven't asked it, but I'm assuming that just because we have a COVID distanced and smaller stadium from a crowd standpoint, they're still going to allow artificial noisemakers. So the only time you could have piped in music would be during a timeout. Yeah. And I do think they should. I don't know if they're going to, but I do think they should have a artificial woo pig suey.
Do something.
They've already said you're not going to have cheerleaders.
Yeah, you're not going to have the band.
And you're not going to have a band, at least during the game. So if you could have, hey, let's call those Hogs, and everybody kind of falls in rhythm with it, it would help. Because I've never been to a stadium, either here in Little Rock, where there was like 16,000 fans trying to call the Hogs. That sounds good in Bud Walton, but I don't think
I don't know how it'll do.
I don't think it'd be good in an outdoor stadium. So they would need all the help they can get. So if you're listening, Hunter, you're a check. We need a piped in woo pig suey over the speakers to kind of make it better.
Agreed. All right, Nutless Hog asks, in regards to the rescheduling this year, has there been an attempt to obtain information on who or how many were involved in this and what their explanation was for it, or will it just stay hid behind a back door in the SEC office somewhere?
You know, probably at some point some hardworking reporter is going to go get some sources and talk to people behind the scenes, and he'll write a story about how that all came down. But to me, it's what's the point? I mean, anybody with a brain knows what happened. The SEC picked out about 4 schools that they felt like had the best chance of having a really good season, and they know that when you play each other and don't play non-conference games, that's going to cause more losses. So I think they were worried, hey, are we going to get a team in the national championship playoff by just playing each other? It's going to make it harder. So let's try to make it as easy as possible on maybe our top 4 schools, so that one of them at least will make it, and if 2 get in, that's fine. But I think that's why that was done. I don't think you'll ever get anybody to admit it, but that's what happened.
No, that's probably accurate. And then Arkansas just got the really bad end of that entire thing.
Yeah, they did.
Our final question is from Hangton Hog, who wants to know, do you think there will ever be an Arkansas villain that turns the stomach of Arkansas fans as much as Texas used to, and still does for some of the more seasoned fans?
If you ask that question to a younger fan, they're going to say, well, sure. I mean, we don't like Alabama. We don't like Ole Miss. But those people, unless you've lived it, you don't understand what the hatred is, what the hatred was back then. That's all gone now. You know, you still got a bunch of old guys like me around that remember that. But that was a deal where you just had fans that they would think all year long, we got to beat Texas this year. They did this, that, we're going to get them. And I've told this story many times, but in '81, when they beat Texas 42-11, I'm up on Mount Sequoia, dead asleep at 1 in the morning, and I hear this stupid crowd noise, and I think I'm having visions or something of the game. And I get up and I go out on my back deck, and it's Dixon Street at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and it looks like a snake, the street, because there's street lights, and there's things moving in the street. And I'm going, what is that? And then I realize it's people. Just in the street, all the way down from Collier's Drug, all the way down over the railroad tracks and back up to where we are right here. And it was just constant noise, like the game was going on. And that's what you get back in those days. That was '81 for beating Texas. I don't think you'll ever see anything like that in the SEC.
I was about to say, it'd be great to get back to that at least at some point.
There's just not anybody in the SEC that you hate like that.
You don't think Missouri would be a future? My whole thing is they haven't done well against Missouri. And what about LSU? I know a lot of the players always say they hate LSU.
That's the closest thing so far, because that rivalry was going pretty good there for a while, that day before Thanksgiving or day after Thanksgiving, whatever it was. That was a good rivalry, but the SEC blew that up. I think Ole Miss is a pretty good rivalry. If you could ever do well against Alabama and be competitive, that might turn into a big rivalry.
All right, that's going to do it for our Ask Mike segment for this week. We'll see you back here next Monday.